Our next speaker is Dr. Brian Callender, an academic hospitalist and medical educator. Brian's interests relate to the clinical experience and the medical humanities, and that led him to develop a course called The Body in Medicine and the Performing Arts. Today, Dr. Callender will discuss the topic, you see it, Understanding Your Hospitalization, a graphic narrative to empower patients and improve communication during the inpatient experience. Brian.
Thanks for everyone for being here. So I am an academic hospitalist. I often think, you get admitted to a hospitalist and what comes next, right? For many patients who are not healthcare providers, being in the hospital is a confusing experience for them, okay? And oftentimes this is due to the patients often have a pretty poor understanding of their diagnosis, their therapies, as well as the hospital course. And there's also data that shows that there's significant confusion about members of the care team, okay? And in general, the inpatient hospital experience for patients is a disempowering experience, in part because there is this real disconnect between the lived experience of a patient in the hospital and our biomedical approach to him or her, okay? And this project stems from professional interest of mine in the patient experience as well as patient education and a personal interest in medical narrative and graphic medicine. And the challenge for me was to figure out how I can combine these interests to improve the inpatient experience. And my sort of aha or eureka moment came once when I was sitting on an airplane and I was dutifully sort of going through the patient safety guide, and I realized, why don't we do something like this for patients when they come into the hospital? Something that is a limited amount of data presented in a sort of aesthetically pleasing way. And this got me to think, well, what materials do we provide to our patients to help them better understand and navigate their hospitalization? And so looking into that, this is something that we provide to patients not too long ago on one of the wards in Mitchell. It's a folder with various things in it, but there's really no cohesive story to it. I discovered as well that at some point there was this glossy patient handbook that was provided, but it was something that I actually never saw out on the wards. This is something that they give out at Mercy. This is the front and the back of it. A lot of text in it, a lot of good information, but it's not very user friendly. And then if you go out into the community, oftentimes you may get one of these sort of generic corporatized patient guides where you insert your logo, and it has, again, a lot of information, but it's not really contextualized to the hospitalization. So the question I wanted to know is, what would happen if we combine content, so good content, information that patients could use, with something that's sort of graphically and aesthetically designed to be more accessible? And so basic principles that I was thinking about when it came to thinking about this guide was it needed to be simple. Some of the stuff that's out there is somewhat complex. It needed to be accessible in terms of the content, the format, and the language. And I really wanted it to have a combination of text and graphics, as well as contain a narrative structure to it. So patients could better understand where they fit in the hospital, in the sort of the hospital experience or the way that a hospitalization unfolds. So this was all well and good in theory, but then the question was, well, how is it going to work in practice? And so 2 years ago, a summer research program with a now third-year medical student, Elisa Wiener, co-mentored by Vinny Aurora, we set out to ask patients, well, what information would they like? And so we did 50 face-to-face patient interviews, during which we focused on two questions. One, what information would patients find useful during their hospitalization? And the second is basically, would patients find a graphic guide useful? And just quickly to go over some of the data from those interviews, one topic of interest that came up was the care team. Patients over and over expressed some interest in having a better understanding of their care team in terms of the members of it, what their schedule is, what is their nighttime availability, and what is the reason for so many providers. A second topic of interest was the diagnostic and treatment process. So patients had questions about, well, what is the reasons for the tests? Why does it take so long sometimes to get a diagnosis? What are the reasons for my medication changes? Or what are the reasons for all these IVs and monitors? And then what emerged through these interviews also were two significant themes that really informed what went into the graphic guide that we created. And one was around patient and family engagement, that patients really recognized the importance of engaging their providers, but they were really unsure of how to do so. And second, questions. Patients also recognize that questions are important, and it's important to ask questions, but they were unsure of what questions to ask. And this goes to the question about whether or not they would find a graphic guide useful. Unfortunately, 42 out of the 50 patients interviewed thought that it would be useful or very useful to have some sort of graphic guide. And so we thought we were at least on the right path when we saw this data. And so this is what we looked at in terms of putting into this graphic guide. We wanted to talk about the hospitalization, the process, the admission, the daytime, the nighttime, and the discharge, sort of the four key sort of time components of a hospitalization. We wanted to talk about hospital safety as well. We wanted to bring in the care team, and we wanted to make sure that it contained important or useful information. Education, in terms of thinking about principles that guided us, two were important. One, education, that we really wanted this we wanted content that focused on the inpatient experience, okay? And then empowerment was important, coming to some of those themes that emerged, that we wanted it to be content that promoted engagement, as well as provide a framework for how to ask questions or what questions to ask. And so over the course of a month, as part of scholarship and discovery, this is what we initially came up with. Okay, this is again a trifold of which I have an example here if you want to see it. But it's very sort of text heavy, and graphic laden. And we were really proud of this. But at the same time, we kind of hit a barrier in the sense that neither of us were designers, neither of us had a background in patient education, and so we thought, well, could we do better? And so I spent part of a summer and early fall working with collaborators from the IIT Institute of Design, Center for Collaborative Healthcare Design, last fall. And when working with this, there was a team of 3 healthcare designers, and we worked on refining concepts around the design of it, the graphics, the content. Because when I handed this to them, this first iteration that we came up with, they looked at it, they said, it's good, we like it, but we can definitely do better. And I agreed with them because this is not as user-friendly as I thought it would be in my mind. Although when we did show this version to patients, some of them said that, well, this is the best thing I've ever seen in a hospital. So stroked our ego again, thinking that we are on the right path with this, potentially. And so now this is what we came up with, and we have versions that we can circulate. So there are 2 different versions that we came up with. But you can see here that this is not as text dense, okay? And the graphics, when I show this, there's a narrative to it. And the narrative aspect is important because we wanted patients to be able to sort of place themselves in their hospitalization, okay? And another thing that we focused on in terms of thinking about empowerment and engagement was that we used action verbs. Talk to your care team, alert your care team about, stay active. But there was a real challenge in going from this to one of these versions in the sense of, do we focus more on education or do we focus more on empowerment? And we decided that maybe it's not best to educate patients extensively about DVTs or falls or hospital-acquired infections, but to really focus on the empowerment aspect of their hospitalization. And then you have the questions to ask. So we created a framework for what we think are important questions to ask, tips for family and friends. The front page starts with your care team and gives very basic descriptions of what the social worker will do, the case manager, the resident, the attending physician. And then again, we have this narrative component that goes through the admission, the daytime, a little bit about the diagnostic process, the nighttime, and then thinking about important things about discharge. And so this is what we come up with, and now it's like, where do we go from here? I have this product, and from a practical perspective, now we want to get it in front of patients. We at the point where I want to do some focus tests with patient focus groups, and then the goal is later this summer, early in the fall, to actually research this, get it out in front of patients, and see if it's making a difference in terms of their understanding of the hospitalization, as well as do they feel more comfortable asking questions and engaging their providers. So that's sort of the practical thing. From a conceptual standpoint, I think about how can a graphic medicine and medical narrative further be utilized to improve patient education. I think in medicine we don't do a good job, especially on the inpatient side, of educating patients about what's going on. And I think there's a big role for narrative and graphics to play in that. And I like this idea of almost taking a patient guide and merging it with a comic book and creating a comic that goes along with their hospitalization. And I wonder, well, what would that look like? A patient comes in and they're flipping through and they're learning about DVTs and hospital-acquired infections and what to think about at the time of discharge. But would something like this actually be more engaging to patients? And I've recently become fascinated with the idea of how can medical narrative, graphic medicine actually lead to better discussions about advanced directives and end-of-life care. And if you sort of take a standard post form and you think about what are these check boxes, but what happens if you step backwards from that and try to get patients to build a narrative that allows them to check the box that they think is most appropriate for them. And there are a number of different exercises that have been done across the country with medical students and with other patient populations to help them better understand their illness. And so my hope is that, well, could we actually create something that really allows patients to express their views in this format that provides content, provides a framework, but also creates a space, again, sort of with these sort of empty comic boxes, that allows them to fill in their own narrative. And those are my acknowledgments, and I'm happy to take any questions. Do I call or who calls? I call. Who's a friendly face? Mindy.
I think this is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the things that we don't do for a living. I just want to give you some kudos, because a lot of the patient information that's like on the web doesn't have pictures, which is so useful. And something like this, I think, is really terrific, and I think it's definitely continue to add this. Because there's a lot of diseases that are really complicated.
Hopefully soon. Some point. I mean, there's certainly literature out there, particularly in the pharmacy world, that marries images with basic text to improve adherence. There's the same healthcare collaborative from IIT also worked with Val Press on her asthma stuff in terms of creating the asthma pathways. And their focus is really how do you actually get the end users to use the product. And that's, again, thinking about this, a lot goes into the text and how it's used and how it's spaced and what does the narrative look like. The interesting thing also about using sort of graphics instead of photos is there's a spectrum of fidelity in terms of thinking about patient education. And if the fidelity is such that it's photographs, but it's photographs of people they don't recognize or they can't place themselves, they disengage from it. And so if you take a step back and you create a sort of generic enough graphic that they can recognize, like, yeah, that could be me, then they're more likely to actually engage with the material because they can see themselves within that narrative. Yep.
So to follow up that fidelity piece, the age of personalized medicine, any intentions of making this more personalized for different types of admissions? We have, surgical admissions are going to be very different than an acute care one. Even within acute care, we have a lot of patients that we admit with DKA. This is the first time they've been diagnosed with diabetes with 3 kids in the ICU. So, this is a very new experience for them. And I oftentimes as an intensivist, I'm focused on fixing their acute illness, and I tell the family, oh, you're gonna receive a lot of education in this admission, but it's like a scary time, and maybe having something that they can read through graphically might be much more helpful than just sort of this reassurance that the information will come.
And I mean, that's a great point, and it's things that I've sort of conceptually thought about as well with other providers. Is like you can make disease specific, and we thought diabetes is certainly one of those, especially the new diagnosis diabetes, what to expect, and or chronic kidney disease is another one in terms of, well, what are the things are we monitoring? Why is it important? What questions might you have? Always sort of leaving a space for patients to insert themselves into the process of patient education, I think, is one of the important roles that a sort of concept like this can play. Another thing that we're going to do is modify this for a unit on the wards that is the primary providers are APNs, because the thing that comes up there is, well, what's an APN? Why are you providing care to me? And to flip part of the education in there to be about what an APN does, why they're providing care for you, to provide patient education that way. The other thing we thought about was like, well, what if you actually slipped in, based on what the admission diagnosis is, something about DKA or heart failure, or that this is the foundation, and then you slip disease specific. That's, I think, a far way off, but it's sort of things conceptually that we've been thinking about.
All right.
I got to go to the board, right? I got to take questions from this end.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
I think this is a really very nice design. I just wondering if you have a video or audio version of this, because different patient so that you can suit a different patients with a different disability.
That is also something we thought about, just in terms of thinking about, can we turn this into video, or something that can be on an iPad, mobilely, something that they could actually engage in and sort of swipe and move themselves through. But that's going to be another Bucksbaum grant coming your way.
Yeah, hi, that was wonderful. I'm wondering, by far, the most common question I get, on the hospital service when I'm seeing someone as consultation is, who is my doctor? Mm-hmm. So would it be possible in here, it says that like you can look at the badge and sort of know the role, but far and away the most common thing is that a lot of people are coming in and talking to me. I guess I need to know who my doctor is, because they very seldom know that.
Yeah, and we tried. If you come and look at this version, there's a whole back page about who's your care team, leaving space to put your name in. Unfortunately, this was one of those things we had to sacrifice somewhat in order to streamline. But that's where I think something that could be more extensive, a thicker guide or something along those lines, where you would really allow, I agree, the care team issue, who are you, why are you here, but creating a space in something like this for them to sort of fill in, like, oh, this is who I am, or here's my card, tape it in this spot for you. Because at the end, it would be nice if patients utilize this in such a way that it was almost kind of a passport from their hospitalization, that they were able to fill in what their diagnosis was, what some of their discharge planning was, who their care team was, and they have this almost as a bit of a passport from their hospitalization.
I just wanted to say how fantastic I think this work is. And I have a little team that's been working on using graphic novel techniques to improve informed consent, and have been able to get NIH funding for that. And we had two hypotheses. One was that people with less accomplishments in terms of literacy would like it better than others. We found no, everybody likes it.
Everybody likes it.
And we also had the hypothesis that maybe younger people would like it better, but no, everybody likes it. So I think, you're onto something. I also think you might be able to get, some substantial funding, especially if you use it in lots of different ways that could have broad purposefulness across the institution, including in research as well as in clinical settings.
Because I think it's sort of when people think, when I come and say I want to do sort of comics, like that's for kids. That's not really I think people under-recognize what something like this could be just in terms of communication. Especially we are a very visual culture.
Yeah.
And when you think about the health literacy of our patient population, something that really marries text and graphics in a meaningful way, I think is going to be more powerful than either standing alone.
Yeah, it helps people imagine what they're about to go through and is very, very empowering for that reason. But it was wonderful work.
In terms of the question, who is my doctor? I would like to mention that I get bills for medicines and other things after I've been in the hospital, and I have no idea who this name is attached to. And I wondered if there could be a very low-tech solution by anybody who comes in and sees you, or anyone who writes a prescription for you, hands you a little card with his name on it or her name.
And that has been tried. I mean, we have our cards that we hand to patients. Vinny Aurora years ago did a face card study that had little pictures on them of the people, and they sort of put them into slots. But one challenge of that is just sort of I think, just some of the inertia. Like, it takes repeated interactions that you have to always do this, and so part of it is just a sort of behavioral change that I think can be difficult to modify.
Yes.
So, Brian, I think that's so great, so exciting. Guy also work on this for the outpatient setting, which is obviously not so much about patient engagement. And this is what that's all about. So many people sort of come unequipped for patient engagement. This whole thing about what question you should ask, it's a place to write it, the answers is just brilliant and simple. But if you think about the obvious thing for outcomes of this is to have
All right.
Have you thought about sort of harder outcome data that you could look at to prove that this is useful, just as a way of getting funding?
I mean, that's sort of the thing, thinking through, okay, if this is out there in front of patients, what are the metrics that we would look at? I think one is just, did they feel, if one of the goals is education about their hospitalization and empowerment, did you feel more educated about your hospitalization? Did you feel more empowered to ask questions, engage your providers, request no disruptions during sleep? The broader health outcomes, I think, is more difficult. I mean, stuff like, did this help you think about discharge, and did it actually potentially prevent a readmission for some reason? I think those will be difficult, but I think we'll just have to look at sort of the first step back of, did you learn anything from this during your hospitalization? Do you have suggestions for metrics to use?
Sleep is part of it, and we're so good at actually monitoring sleep. That would be sort of an easy thing to go after. Patients know if they ask to sleep through the night.
Then do they actually ask? Yeah.
So it's interesting that you use the word passport. We actually were funded in the PICU through the Bucksbaum pilot grants in 2015 and created a PICU and a NICU passport. And it focused a little bit on a guide to admission, but then was a device that both the children and the parents could use to mark what happened to them during their hospitalization with, stamps that you would get if you went to a particular study or a particular imaging test, et cetera. We designed it to be brought with you to your outpatient appointments so that it could perhaps be of use to your outpatient physicians or providers in lieu of a discharge summary that may have never made it to them.
Yeah.
So we struggle, though, a little bit with the evaluation and how best, should we look at parents and families, or should we also target the outpatient providers and see if it actually facilitates communication?
What do you think about the use of patient navigators to kind of help us as hospitals use them?
Like individuals walking?
Right, they have them on staff to kind of help them navigate these sorts of things.
I think they could be great. Right. I don't know enough about them or the literature behind them, but certainly in my sort of research about this, and then more sort of personal interest in the hospital experience, or just the individual, what we call sort of the lived body experience of how patients experience what they're going through in the hospital, that at any point that we could provide someone or something to help them better contextualize that experience, I think is certainly beneficial to their overall understanding of their hospitalization. I mean, I realize that was a very sort of generic answer, but I think we really, as for the providers in the room, I don't mean to disparage you, but I think we do a really bad job of not understanding how patients are living the experience of what they're going through, and understanding how being sick and having an illness affects their comprehension of time, their comprehension of space, their comprehension of the future. And we don't think enough about how, when we just go in and give them information, how do they actually contextualize that information within that lived experience and what it's going to mean for them. I just think we do a really bad job of that. In part, we have to do it that way because that's the biomedical approach to what we do, and it's science. But there's I think, a sort of clash when we think about the lived experience of a patient and our biomedical approach. And we don't do a really good job of trying to integrate those a little bit better. I mean, that's my personal opinion. Yeah.
What about simple things like talking to a patient and asking if they've ever been in the hospital before, and finding out if this is routine or if this is their first time, asking, evoking from them a little bit of how is this feeling, where you are, how the hospital is organized.
I mean, I think, interesting about that question, merging it with your question, like, a patient navigator could just be somebody who, here I'm taking you to this, and here I'm going to help you understand it. But then I think there's the actual experience of it, not just the sort of transportation through, and I'm going to walk you to here and help you get into a room, but the idea of actually somebody that can help them navigate through the experience and asking questions like that. I mean, of course, the problem is who's going to pay for that. I think, or training would have to go into that. And if you ask providers to do it, they're going to just tell you that we don't have time. I mean, we wish we could sit down and spend an hour with all of our patients when they first get admitted and talk about the non-medical things, but talk about the lived experience things. But I mean, we're all under a lot of time pressures, unfortunately. Oh, but my wife had a question.
I just wanted to speak to the question about patient navigation. I'm sorry, thanks. Thank you for that lovely talk.
I was waiting for that.
I think that the difference between something like patient navigation, whereby the navigator really helps patients through things and takes a lot of does a lot of the work. The nice thing about this pamphlet is that it really focuses on patient empowerment and allows I think one outcome you could look at is self-efficacy. So in terms of self-navigating. And so I think that that's what's nice about this, is it really kind of helps to empower the patient to do their own navigation, and definitely more cost effective than a patient navigator. But there's, I think, tremendous benefit for that too.
Thank you.
Thank you.